Welcome to the Author Show, where we present new authors and books. From fiction to self-help and everything in between, you'll find it all here. To watch the TV version of our program, visit authorswebtv.com. That's authorswebtv.com. And now, let the show begin with your hosts, Don McCauley and Danielle Hampson.
Hello and welcome back to the show. This is your host, Don McCauley. Today we're welcoming to the program author Stanley S. Thornton, and he is the author of He Walks with Dragons. Stanley was born in the Los Angeles area in 1954. He wrote his first story in the second grade. He started writing poetry when he was 12, his first book in 2010, and came out with his first fantasy in April of 2013. Stanley, how are you?
Oh, pretty good.
Let's start with the big question. Tell us about this book, please.
Well, my premise is that nearly every civilization ever on the face of the earth has had legends of dragons. So I assume that there must have been dragons at one time. This book is about the relationship between those dragons and ancient men, told through one man's experiences. He tells his story through his own eyes and in his own words. It's kind of like an old man sitting on the porch telling old war stories.
So who did you write this book for specifically?
I wrote this book for people over 14 who want a different kind of book on dragons and who want to be able to simply sit down and be entertained. And if they come away with a love of dragons, so much the better.
Now, would you say that there's any type of central message or perhaps underlying theme that you could say runs throughout the book?
Well, I didn't really write it with a specific message in mind, but I have written the book with strong morals and unwielding principles for my dragons. So I guess if people really look for messages, they can find them, but I didn't really insert them into the book.
Now, if you could compare this book with any book out there we might already be familiar with, which book would it be and why?
Well, in a way, it's kind of like Lord of the Rings. It's an epic journey, but instead of a hobbit from the Shire, it's about a young boy from a small village in Central Europe. In a way, it's like Harry Potter, in which the young student learns powerful magics and uses it to benefit mankind. As far as books about dragons, I'd have to say the closest examples are Dragonheart or Aragon, and that's because they actually portray the dragons as benevolent rather than evil. In my book, I do have a belief structure and a moral structure for dragons.
So how are your dragons different than dragons in other books?
Well, most dragons are portrayed as evil, fire-breathing, maiden-eating, gold-hoarding monsters. My dragons are highly intelligent, extremely logical, benevolent creatures. They don't breathe fire, but they are capable of tapping an ancient energy and performing their magic, some of which could be mistaken for fire-breathing. They prize only one treasure, but I won't mention that because that's for the reader to learn in the book.
So when and where does this book take place?
Well, I don't specifically say where, but if the reader pays a little attention, they will find clues. But it starts roughly in about 5000 BC and follows the hero's life up to about 350 AD. You have to trust me that there is an explanation for how he lives that long.
Can you tell us about the hero of your book?
My hero is Drag. As I say, he's just an average young boy born in a very naive, innocent world where he lives his early years at a very primitive level. For him and the rest of his village, it's like their whole world is the village. And he's suddenly thrust into this much larger world, the world of dragons. Even by today's standards, almost any young boy could be Drag, learning that the world is larger than he had understood it to be.
Now, you wrote the book in first person. Why did you do that?
I call it eliminating the white noise. I wanted the book to be about Drag and the telling of the story. So you only hear what Drag hears, and you only see what Drag sees. This means there's no distractions from the main story. That doesn't mean the story can't take detours along the line, but it's still the story from his perspective from beginning to end.
Now, you give your dragons a hierarchy and a belief system. How did you develop that?
Well, when I was a young boy, I was intrigued by the Greek and Roman mythologies, so I developed my hierarchy based on their structure. The Greeks and the Romans had the greater gods, the lesser gods, and followed by figures like the Muses. With my dragons, it's similar, except that they're not gods. I have Tiamat, the Great Mother, the greater elites, the lesser elites, the elite masters, and finally the guardian dragons, like my hero's dragon. Below that, there are normal dragons who influence over their own locales. For a belief system, I've basically borrowed from the Celtic gods, since they're in the general area. And the Celtic gods had been locality gods, and my dragons, of course, are locality. They stay in one small area. From a philosophical position, they didn't have a heaven or a hell. They had this world, and they had the other world, which is the spirit world. And everybody went to the spirit world. Beyond that, there are other subtleties, but I'll leave that for the reader to discover.
Where did the idea for this book originate?
The idea for the book came from a poem I wrote, The Forgotten Tale. I didn't realize it when I began writing it, but that's where the poem ended up going. It gives an explanation of why dragons are no longer among us. I merely expanded upon that poem. I included, at the back of the book, I included that poem plus 3 others, which I call my dragon poems. And once they've read the story, and then they read the poems, the reader will realize how each poem influenced a part of the story.
Now, you included historical events. Why?
Well, there's 2 reasons. The first reason is to reinforce the fantasy. If I tell you a story and you can verify that 3 of the 4 parts of the story are accurate and actually happened, then you're more likely to believe the 4th part happened. For the second reason, it's about the reader. By using a number of actual historical facts, once they've read the story, they can go back and actually read about the background of events and real characters that were involved in the story and get more of a feel for those individuals if they're interested in them.
Would you say that you have a specific writing style?
Not really. I write how I feel a particular project should be written. Some styles work better in some instances than in others. In this particular case, I felt that first person was a better way to write it. Other books in the series would probably be third person because they allow more information from other characters.
Who or what influenced your writing the most?
I'd say it was Mark Twain. He writes simple stories in simple language, and he leaves a lot of the details to the reader's imagination. For instance, when he says there's a paddle boat on the river, he doesn't spend 6 pages explaining to you what a paddle boat looks like. He lets the readers form their own picture of the paddle boat. I mean, even today we can go to Disneyland and write on the Mark Twain, so we know what a paddle boat looks like.
Now, would you say that your characters are pure fiction, or do you draw from people you know in real life?
Some of my characters are drawn from reality, but those are people who really existed. But the major characters are drawn from within me. Some are different parts of my personality. For instance, Drag, as his younger self, I was similar. I grew up in an era when children were naive and innocent, and the young Drag is naive and innocent. I also have been told I have a logical, analytical mind with a quirky sense of humor, and so does Drag's dragon. Some of these are simply characters who I think should act and behave, a certain way, and I just make them do it. I don't have a person that I've modeled them after.
Would you say that you're more of a character artist or more a plot-driven writer?
I guess I'm more plot-driven in as much as I begin with the story I want to tell, and then the characters make the story happen. I start with a main storyline, the main points, and divide that into chapters, and then I start an outline where I give the major points of each of the chapters. But when I'm writing the outline, sometimes I get a good subplot, so I add 3 to 6 pages to the outline. So I start with an outline that's supposed to be 6 to 10 pages, and it can be as many as 60 pages once I finish.
Other than selling the work, of course, is there anything else you hope to accomplish with it?
Well, I'd like to be read and enjoyed. I think the main purpose of fantasy is to entertain. I guess I'd love to someday find myself on the New York Times bestseller list. Sure, who wouldn't? But, if that's your goal, the odds are you're not going to reach it.
In your opinion, who should buy this book?
Well, there's the obvious, people who love dragons, people who like fantasy, If you like Lord of the Rings or Narnia or Harry Potter, you'll probably like this book.
Well, time is getting very short, so the most important question, where can we buy this book?
It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, pretty much any online bookstore. As far as the brick and mortar stores, most stores probably won't carry my book on the shelf because I'm not a well-known author. But if you ask them, most of them will be willing and able to order you a copy.
Could you spell your name for us, please?
Stanley, Stanley, S, Thornton, Thornton.
Well, this has been just great. Our guest today has been Stanley S. Thornton, and he is the author of He Walks with Dragons. Stanley, thanks very much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
This is Don McCauley wrapping up another edition of The Author Show. If you're an author and would like to be a guest on the show, visit www.theauthorshow.com, fill out the form, and we may be contacting you shortly. To learn about how you can participate in the 50 Great Writers You Should Be Reading contest, visit our awards site at 50greatwritersyoushouldbereading.com. To receive book marketing tips, articles, and to learn about author book marketing success stories, sign up for our free monthly newsletter at theauthorshownewsletter.com. And for even more tips, visit Book Marketing, the Author's Marketing Powerhouse, at www.theauthorsmarketingpowerhouse.com. We look forward to seeing you here next time on The Author Show.
Thanks for listening to The Author Show. To contact us, call toll-free 1-877-955-8800. That's 877-955-8800. Or visit theauthorshow.com. That's theauthorshow.com. Tune in next time to another great author on The Author Show.